Hey guys, my name is Rai. Today I wanted to walk through how I did my plus 17 top on my Brewmaster Monk. This route is sick, it's very fast, and some of you might not have done it yet. I kind of wanted to use this to showcase, how we did this key, what I did, and what my challenges were as a tank, and maybe to talk through some more of the pain points of just the dungeon in general. I have played with everybody on this team before, however this is the first time that we've done this key, and this is actually a one-shot on plus 17, which is kind of cool. In the first pull, we are going to be bringing the Rage Horn into boss, as I think is the pretty standard route as it's been released. And with 3 melee DPS, you're going to see that this is a little bit harder to deal with than having some range. We have to be very careful on the Searing Death, and as well as our positioning movement for the volatile acid on the ground. I keg smash the Bloodhorn, I keg smash the 3 bosses, I go into kick, and I immediately reset my weapons order here, keg smash, and as well get all my damage kind of ramped up in the opener. I do commit Fort Brew here immediately into this pool because the damage can be a little spiky on Gather, and one of the things that I'm also concerned of is the Rage Horn AoE on top of the Smash as well as Mortal Strike. Once you're into this boss, however, you shouldn't really be worried about taking too much damage. Kind of your prerogative here is going to be moving the team together as a group away from these volatile spores and putting some damage in this Bloodhorn. You can run your Soothe ability, which gets rid of the Rage Horn's Tantrum by having a Paralysis cast. You can only Paralysis the Rage Horn once though, as it is a 30-second CD, so make sure that you're only doing it if you're going to try to save your DPS globals or you have no other Soothe option. On this fight, the things that you should be concerned about as a tank is the overlap of Searing Death and Mortal Strike, or if you have to move and you can't get these kicks. These necrotic bolts aren't too deadly on your own, and if you don't have enough classes to kick, or you're not in communication, you miss some, you should be okay. However, what you should be concerned about is, again, these kicks going off while perhaps, you have to deal with any other overlap on this fight. The necrotic puddles on itself aren't too deadly, and the Mortal Strike isn't too bad at all, but what you're going to see here is this deadly and nasty overlap between, having to move with the frontal, having tons of melee to move out from the Searing Death, and then having other damage going on as well from melees. This is a time in which I would recommend to hit things like your Diffuse Magic to deal with the Searing Death, your Dampened Harm to deal with the Mortal Strike, or as well, making sure that you snap that Celestial Brew reset with your Black Ox Brew. Otherwise, I think you should have an okay time on this fight. Pretty much this fight is all about team coordination and movement, and I think here we do even make a mistake. If you tank the boss a little bit off the wall further than what I have it towards the middle of the room, your team can all bait the frontal outside the room, meaning it's going to give your team tons of space to be able to move. However, this overlap here, which happens about 2 minutes in the fight, is the Searing Death frontal overlap, and you're going to see that the problem is that I didn't tank it far enough off the wall to give my team a lot of space, and our warrior goes down by having to move out of the frontal and into the mud. Kind of my mistake, and I think all of us could have baited a little bit better there, but ultimately that could have been prevented from a tank perspective if I had played a little bit better. I am choosing to focus down, the caster here, Sathel. The reason why particular is with all these melee, we want to get rid of Searing Death as quick as possible. Once Searing Death is over, all we have to do is be able to move the Noxious Spores, deal with the, Mortal Strike from the Decapitator, and then move on to the next part of the dungeon. Luckily, even with the death, the timer's fine, and you're going to see throughout this key, there are tons of little places that I'm going to kind of talk about and illustrate that we could have saved time. This timer isn't overly tight, however, we are in our first attempt here of a top 17, even though we didn't have time in. There's some things I'd like to do next in saving some time and as I prep for 18. In this route, we are going to the Xav Wing first, and we're only going to be playing one of the 3 mini-bosses, and I'm going to show you guys exactly what you need to do to be able to skip them. On the first mini-boss, you can get pretty unlucky and get the mini-boss that I did, and he's going to do a Savage Flurry. This absolutely decimates tanks, but I'm going to show you some tricks of how to deal with it. Kind of the standard pull now is bringing in this Arbalist into the mini-boss here as soon as you can, and using things like CC abilities and stops to make sure that your team doesn't get overlapped from the Arbalist into another mechanic. As I pull Dokig, the mini-boss with Savage Flurry, I need to make sure that for every Savage Flurry I have something, whether it be a Celestial Brew, a set of Purifies or 2, an external, or either Dampen or Fort Brew. This ability absolutely slaps, and while these 2 conscripts are alive, I'm not going to be able to kite because I want to be able to hit the mob and get enough Brew CDR as well as Black Ox Orbs to be able to sustain myself here. You're going to see though that for every time the Savage Flurry comes out, I'm going to press something. For that one, I used my Trinket, I had a Purify, and I'm going to start ticking down here. As you can see, my stagger's pretty high. One trick to note is you can actually end up ranging this flurry. If you use Transcendence and you set it up somewhere in the room or roll it out, you can max range this and it can save you, especially if you're taking down like I did. Given that, I really wanted to fight the uptime boss here and I was pretty confident I wouldn't die, but towards the end you could see that I ended up getting hit pretty hard. And even with, Fort Brew and Celestial Brew kind of ticking, I do have taken a ton of damage. So again, you should give it a try where you can max range this out with Transcendence, but I wouldn't do it while the conscripts are alive. At this point, I do have Dampen Harm available. I do have my Black Ox Brew coming up shortly, and as well, if I really need to, like I said, I can get that barrier or that pain suppression coming up. Another mistake I did particularly here is, especially for this flurry, there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't just turned around and stood in the barrier, but we were talking a little bit in Discord about what we're going to be doing next in the key. As you're going to see, in this next pull, we're going to be skipping this mini-boss, and you need some movement speed to do it. We do waste a couple seconds here setting this up as we didn't have Wind Rush ready. If you're going to be doing this skip, you either need to charge the Wind Rush, Stampeding Roar, or your team to have another movement speed capability to get through. And we do end up going straight into the Captain's pack. This pack is probably the deadliest pack in the entire dungeon, and for itself, you should be focusing the Captain here. If you do have priority classes, you could get away with killing the Arbalest first, but when the Captain's alive, he's going to have a kick, the Demo Shout, as well as he's going to reduce the damage taken of the conscripts and Arbalists around him. Kind of your number one goal as a tank here is to be helping, put priority damage into the Captain, and as well trying to desync the Arbalists from shooting somebody more than once. They do their quarry shot, and as well, this Jagged Quarry, you want to be able to desync as much as possible so they don't go in the same person. So using things like Paralysis, Leg Sweep, Ring of Peace, and calling for stops from your group is going to help a lot. Remember, as soon as one of these dies, this pull gets extraordinarily easy. However, when two are alive, especially given that we're skipping a mini-boss, our priest has nowhere to LOS. These shoots are LOSable back in the room before, but it does mean we'd have to use the mini-boss to play it. Given that we've skipped our first mini-boss, we're going to be skipping our second here, and in 3 seconds, we're going to be skipping right into the boss room. We waste no time this time and go straight into Xav. You'll see that we have 4 minutes on Bloodlust, which can be seen in the top right-hand corner of my screen, or in the bottom left, and we're not going to be using Bloodlust on this fight, but for the pull after. For our composition, Xav is pretty easy, and as a Brewmaster, this fight's exceptionally easy as well, as you can kind of game every single one of his brutal combos. You're going to see throughout this encounter, every time a brutal combo comes out, all I'm doing is making sure that I can force dodge with my Elusive Brawler, meaning that I blackout kick right before it happens, and then hit a Purify, and if I need to, hit a big Celestial Brew. Otherwise, on this fight, we have elected not to really kill the banners directly, but I'm going to be hitting them quite a bit as a tank, as I have a lot of cleave on Brew. My blackout kick's going to annihilate them, and every 1.5 minutes, I do have the ability to Touch of Death one of the banners. As soon as I have Touch of Death and Weapons of Order, you're going to see I do a ton of damage on this fight, and it's very easy for me to just sit on the boss, or tell my team to sit on the boss as well. Throughout this fight, one strategy you can use is imploring Bloodlust on here and using a different route to come here first. I think if there's any boss in the dungeon that Bloodlust is good on, it's probably Xav, and the particular reason why is this boss can go on exponentially longer the more times you have to go down. Similar to some bosses like in the past in Season 2 Primal Tsunami, when you are time gated by phases, and I consider this a phase boss, these bosses can be kind of like troublesome. And I think in our kill time this ends up being almost 4 minutes because we don't lust it. Even with a strong melee comp that has pretty good boss damage, and as well my brew does synergize really well with this team composition, we do have a little bit of a tough time, and we want to make sure that we can make up as much time as possible in timing this key. As you'll see, and as I comment throughout here, this isn't the cleanest run, but we have a lot to improve on, but I think the route itself is very fast. Skipping those 2 mini bosses enables us to be able to, instead of be fighting one mob, fight 4 or 5 at a time, and use our DPS CDs on something more efficient, like that Captain Pack. As you see, the banner comes out here, I kind of tell my shaman that he should be hitting boss, and I'm basically just sending my Tiger's Palms with face palms, my blackout kicks, and as well you're going to see a Touch of Death here right in this banner, which is going to finish it before our DPS even get back up from their phase. I'd recommend if you do have a team composition that, doesn't mirror mine, that you guys should have a discussion whether or not you need to kill banners. Druid can go pretty easily, Shaman and Warrior have decent enough mobility, but for a Priest, he only has Phantasm to get out of the banners, so if he's a little bit slow, it might be a little bit of a tough time. This can be negated by a Paladin, so if you're playing with a Rep Paladin or a Prop Paladin, you can get freedom on this boss, and it does enable you to kind of put some more boss damage in as opposed to hitting banners, but Like I said, we cleave these down pretty evenly and we just focus on boss damage. As we're looking at finishing this fight, we're trying to figure out when we need to send and what we need to do next. Our next lust in the dungeon is coming up in 30 seconds, and we're choosing to hold it for the Gorechop wing. You're going to see that after this boss, we do a pretty big pull, and it doesn't actually go as planned. It ends up being a little bit sloppy, and we end up having a death on it, but however, if you're going to be doing the Mega Gorechop pull, which is pulling the room and the pad in, you're going to want Bloodlust for it. If you start missing kicks, and especially too, as you've recognized probably in this competition by now, we have no Solar Beam, we have no Silence Sigil, and, you know, I don't have a Prot Warrior. I'm not playing Prot Warrior, so I can't really silence everything in Silence Kick. So making sure that, you know, if we're going to fight the big Gorechop pull, that we have enough kicks assigned as well as stops, or else we could lose the encounter pretty easily. We do end up having a death to Clemens right at the end of this boss, but it's alright as the boss dies here. You know, Clem unfortunately did get trapped in that frontal, and we're off to the next part of the dungeon. We made up pretty good time, as we're about 11 minutes in now with 2 deaths. We do have tons of time in this dungeon, but we still need to know that on 17 we can't make too many mistakes. Like I said, it was our first time in here, and we need to iron out the routes, our assignments, and everything else to make sure this dungeon goes smoothly in the future. This pull is probably one of the harder pulls in the dungeon, as you're going to be fighting tons of leapers. That's going to be a little bit odd in the gather, and then we're going to want to pull in the pat pretty shortly. We do commit Bloodlust here, which for a full melee comp also isn't the best and easiest pull. As mobs are going to be jumping around and we're not going to be able to have full uptime hitting them, I need to find a proper time and as well set up a cadence for pulling in this pack in the doorway. I tagged the pack with Rushing Jade Wind, and actually this ends up being a little bit of a mistake. I think what we probably should have done and would have actually saved us time is if we actually pulled in this pack after some of the casters died. I did panic, given that we were in Bloodlust, and I figured on plus 17 we need to be a little bit more aggressive, but what we're going to see here is that we ended up desyncing our kicks with stops. What does that mean? It does mean that we end up having a Withering Discharge go off. If a Withering Discharge goes off on the ski level, it could result in somebody dying if not prepared with a big defensive. As you're going to see here in a second, our Druid does go down, and we are left with that nasty disease debuff on our party. Thankfully, the rest of the team's able to stay alive, and we're able to continue putting some damage into this pack. However, looking back, I think I would have opted to either break this up or hitting paralysis maybe on one Sludge Spear and chaining it in. I think it would have been a lot easier to handle with only 3 kicks, as they do jump out a lot, and we did overlap stops. This pulls really hard, especially too without a VDH and a Boomkin. However, I think even with an Unholy DK, I'd probably die a little bit faster. As this pack comes to an end, we're going to be going through and making up some time as I kind of drag this Butcher down the hallway. The next stop in this key is going to be fighting the Gorechop Trash and then Gorechop itself, which for me was kind of a scary point in the dungeon, as you're going to see here. We're kind of fortunate with a decent pat, and we decide to go left. Luckily, no incidences, nobody pulls the Rancid Gas Bag, and we do have a lot of time still left in the key. Despite having 3 deaths, we're still on pace, but we know we can't really take too much time to sit around. This next pull is I'm going to be pulling this 5-pack into the Rancid Gas Bag that pats up and down the hallway. I would recommend not pulling into the hallway there in this corridor where all the ads jump down, as that pull can be very deadly. The issue is particular when the Rancid Gas Bag is pulsing damage and you have leapers jumping in and out. Your team's going to be taking a ton of passive damage as well as leaper damage. There's also 2 kicks, which isn't that too big of a problem, but what we opt to do, because we don't have Bloodlust or, a ton of big CDs right here, I think we have Berserk and, Convoke up, we do pull in the Gas Bag, and I call this hold all our damage for a second as we decide to commit onto this thing. What's important here, and I talk about this in some of my videos, is priority damage. The only thing stopping us from chaining into the next pull is the Rancid Gas Bag dying. In a lot of these pulls, and I think there's a large misconception in Mythic Plus, is that you need to do tons of damage in every pull in order to time the key. In certain pulls, in a lot of dungeons, and I can give good examples too, all the way back to Brackenhide and Dragonflight, where the only thing that matters is actually killing the oaks. When you killed an oak in the tree area, you could move on to the next pull and chain. However, hitting Divine Storm or mass AoE in the low lashers didn't actually do anything for your team. Including dotting them on Shadow Priest was pretty much useless and just pad. Especially on packs like this, the only thing that's preventing us from chaining into the next pack, or even going into Gorechop itself, is this Rancid Gas Bag dying. We don't care about the rest of the mobs, and we don't care about the cleave. All we care about is making sure that this thing dies and we can chain in. Next, our prior target here is Circle, so we want to make sure that the mob that can kick and cast, as we have no range kicks, is dead before we pull into boss. I am going to be pulling this Butcher, as well as this other Butcher and Diseased Horror into the boss, and this is going to be a very tough pull for me on Brew. What you're going to notice in Gorechop is I fall behind immediately here, as now I decide for time I'm going to pull in 2 Horrors and the Butcher into Gorechop, which is already a hard-hitting boss. For each one of his Hateful Strikes, I'm going to need to pop something or have a Purify ready. The problem is in this boss is you have to move quite a bit, and sometimes you might be out of the boss's melee range, so you're not going to be able to regenerate as many Ox Orbs, and as well, I'm not going to be getting that cooldown reduction on my brews. As the pull starts, right here, I'm fighting to try to get back Fort Brew and making sure that I have enough buttons to make sure that I can live all these Hateful Strikes as well as the leftover damage, the Butcher damage, and the Horror damage. This is a very scary part of tanking the key on any tank, and it makes no difference to me that I'm on Brew. While I do make a mistake here is I also get stunned while everything's alive and do manage to get that, rallying cry off. We have no pain subs, but I do manage to live. I try to hit my dwarf as well when I get stuck in the chains and the walls, but it doesn't go off. At this point, I'm very behind and all these ads are still alive. The more ads are alive here is going to help me sustain a little bit, but also I'm taking a ton of damage and it's hard for me to catch up from these Hatefuls. Until this Diseased Horror dies, it's going to be really dangerous for me because we have no pain subs from our Disc Priest, and as well, I'm not going to be able to play a complete catch up on myself. If you played Brew, you know that you need to let yourself slow rot in this class. You need to let yourself die to be able to get caught up, meaning that you kind of want high stagger to be able to purify, and you want to make sure that you use your buttons as late as possible and kind of like let yourself rot a little bit, let yourself die. So see, I try to save that last purify as late as possible to get a big heal off and make sure that X spell comes out right before the Hateful Strike. Even with some powered shields, I am able to get through this boss with a very sloppy start. Not my finest job on Gorechop, but we do manage to live, and Clem's kind of a beast for being able to help keep me up. As the extra trash is now dead, I am now completely caught up, and as you can see, I have Dampen Harm back, I have my Black Ox Brew available, and I have my Trinket coming up in 3 seconds. Given that all of this is back and available now, I don't think I'm really in any more danger on Gorechop, and you're going to see I have a pretty easy time for the rest of the encounter. Remember, quick trick, just hit Purify after every time you take a Hateful, and if you fall behind, use that Black Ox Brew to help get caught up. Don't pull that trash in if you're a little bit scared. You can weave it down a little bit, but if you're close for timer, it is kind of the pull to do. What I wouldn't recommend is bringing in the 2 Horrors like I did, as they do a ton of tank damage, and if you miss a kick, they're going to be alive for a very long time, as they do have the Meat Shield cast. Otherwise, this fight shouldn't be too bad for you and Brew. Brew is able to survive all these Hateful Strikes with kind of a free pass, as you can just stagger them and just purify them after. If you do need to commit a lot of defensives towards the end of this encounter, that's completely acceptable as well, as you're not going to have any big tank, hitting mobs for a while after this fight. This is a key which you can also try testing out Ox Stance. Ox Stance is available at the bottom left of your tree in the Brewmaster talents, and you can drop something like Chi Surge or Anvil and stay for this talent point. Hateful Strike is going to be hitting you on the ski level for approximately, anywhere from 50 to 70% of your health. So Ox Stance is a good chance of proccing, meaning that you are going to get, additional stagger from it. But it's not really necessary yet. I felt like I could have lived just fine, and I think if I played this boss better, I'd have a really easy time living. I did time this key on 16 with 10 less item levels and felt okay, but I did have a sloppy go this time. Remember, like I said, this is my first time in here, so getting used to the damage patterns on a new key level can also be a little bit daunting. Really quickly, I get up here and I want to get into the Gauntlet to pull the ghosts into the Soulstorm. This is the last swing that we have in this key, and this is one of the easier tank requirements. However, there's going to be a lot of trash we have to pull. If you remember back to earlier in the video, we did skip 2 mini bosses, which means that we have to play a ton of trash on all the platforms. As I'm tagging the Shackled Souls, you'll see that I hit like a Tiger's Palm, a Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick, Keg Smash, Spinning Crane Kick, and anything I can to get a little bit more than just Spinning Crane Kick threat on these, because the last thing I want is like my team to be pre-dotting or do a little bit damage and then end up getting threat, getting aggro, and then dying. As these mobs get grouped in, I do call here that the first stop I'm going to be using is Leg Sweep when they all get through the door. This is to buy my DPS a little bit of time to pop their CDs before we start rotating other defensives. On this pull, this is a fine pull to use Fort Brew on Gather, and as well a really good time on the Portal Guardian to use Diffuse Magic. The Soulstorm is going to be the hardest thing that's going to be hitting you in this pull, as your healer is going to be concerned with healing the team, and as well, the melees from all these mobs don't really hit too hard. These mobs are casting half the time, and I'm doing my best in Discord to call stops. At this point, we're kind of out of stops. All we kind of have coming up here is, Shockwave in 8 seconds. So we're just doing our best to make sure that we kill the Portal Guardian, get kicks out where we can, and make sure that we can interrupt some of these shackled souls so none of our team members die in the overlap. In this particular route, which I'm going to be linked in my Discord below, we are going to go left here, fight another Portal Guardian, and then go right. Like I said, these pulls shouldn't be too bad for you as a tank. This is a good time for you to just do a ton of damage, kick mobs where you can, and if you're in communication with your team, calling stops as needed. Like I said, in this route, we pull a ton of extra mobs on these platforms to make up count for skipping that mini-boss, and I still think it's really worth it. All the count in here can be easily AoE'd, and as well, for the bone soldiers, they can be purged, meaning that they do start at half health and they're pretty efficient. Given that we have 4 melee kicks in this composition and we are in communication, it's pretty easy for us to handle some of the nasty overlaps. As we get down this platform, you're going to see immediately here, I see that we have, we have warrior cooldowns available, we have Avatar coming up, we have Berserk, we have Convoke. Our Shaman always has damage, so that's always a good sign. And I'm going to be soloing the Bone Magus. What do I mean by solo? You can see here that by the time my CC ends, by using Kick, in cap, and then using a late leg sweep, I'll be able to get my next kick back here by the end of its next cast, and the mob will be dead. Brewmaster being able to kind of solo this is kind of neat as long as it's focused, because you can just call that all your CC is going to cover one mob. You'll see that when there's ever a solo Bone Magus, I'll always call my kick into my paralysis, into my leg sweep, into my kick. By that point, the Bone Magus should be dead, or you should be in touch of death range and should die pretty quickly. You'll see here that we do have to pull these 2 Bone Magi, and I decided to open early with a Ring of Peace, I think. And now we're just going to be calling stops, and as well getting our kicks. And then we have In-Cap Roar and Thunderstorm available, and we're making sure that we weave in our kicks in between our stops, because we don't want to overlap everything and have any of these Bone Spears go through. These are a one-shot, however these Bone Magi are extremely count efficient, and you're going to see here, it's actually really easy as we go to the right platform. On this right platform, we are going to be fighting 6 Bone Magi and the Bone Storm dude. The Soulforged Bone Reaver actually doesn't really do much anymore, as you're probably used to from Shadowlands. It used to be kind of a pain in the ass. Now we're just going to be fighting these 2 Bone Magi, we're going to be dodging Bone Spikes, and eventually he's going to do a little Whirlwind that we kind of move out of. Again, Bone Magi here, you can see I do the exact same combo. Kick, paralysis, leg sweep, kick, and then I touch of death. We're going to wait here for the Bone Storm, and then I'm going to chain it aside. I really like the kind of ordering here, as soon as a Bone Storm kind of comes out, we're going to make sure that we pull in another side, as these mobs should be dead. I am calling stops, and we are buying time for our next kicks. Our next kicks go out, so I'm calling a stop in between, but we do have Dwarf and Deepsis kick. We Thunderstorm desync, and then we go kick kick out of Cap Totem, and then we're able to pull in the next side if needed. Now we only have Vortex and Typhoon, as we're buying back some kicks, but we're about to have all kicks up. I call that I'm going to kick my target here, but I don't have paralysis this time, so I won't be soloing all the kicks on this Bone Magus. At this point, we've kind of farmed back all of our stops, including having Thunderstorm, Shockwave, Leg Sweep, and Typhoon, so none of this pull should be pretty deadly for us. Even if you don't have 4 melee kicks, even if you have 3, as long as you have a team composition that has some stops, and most importantly, you have somebody in your comp that can purge, these pulls should be very easy for you and they're very count effective. This is the last platform here, and there's not really too much to talk about. This pack absolutely just falls over, and you're just doing the exact same thing with the Magi here. If I really needed to, I could solo stop this, but all the kicks on this platform aren't that important. There's a frontal, make sure you kill the Bone Magus, and as well, after that, you're going to be pretty much okay to go into boss. At this point, we have 9 minutes left in the dungeon. I know that we have time, but it's going to be a little bit crunched. We did make some mistakes, and this wasn't exactly a perfectly clean run, but there's a lot of things that we could have improved on, including timing, pacing, and pulling. Remember, in the Bloodlust Bowl, we did lose one of our DPS and cooldowns, which kind of sucked, and as well, our skips were kind of slow as we kind of had to wait on movement speed abilities and moving in and waiting for some pulls. Gorechop was also a little slower than intended, as, I was a little bit of panicked and I probably could have done more damage. Overall, my damage was really high in this key, and this did end up being 100 bars for the key itself, even though there's not many Brewmasters playing, it was still kind of fun. And as I pull this boss, there's really not really much to talk about. At this point, I'm just going to be fighting the boss over on this side, having our team members stack up for all of the soul drops, and calling kicks where I can. I've kind of been the de facto shot caller in most of my groups since I came back to retail WoW and Dragonflight, so this isn't anything new to me, but even if a bolt goes through, your team's going to be alright. The only scary thing that can kind of happen is the soul well that kind of comes out, as well as a kick overlap. But I do call for my team to actually just, cleave these ads as well. I think with all of the CC that we have and cleave in this composition from Feral, Enhance, and Sweeping Strikes Warrior, you can pretty much just leg sweep these ads, ring a piece, and they're never going to go into the boss. One trick that your team should be doing is not spamming cleave on these ads. If you're playing with an Owl, they probably shouldn't be Starfalling. If you're playing with a Rep Paladin, they definitely shouldn't be Divine Storming. And you should be letting classes, if you play with them, that have funnel, like Shadow Priest or Havoc, funnel off these ads and into boss stim. This boss can be, either 3 minutes or 4 minutes, depending on how your DPS depends to profile their damage. Luckily, in this composition, I don't have too much problem with that. We end up killing this boss pretty reasonably quick. But however, I do kind of scold my DPS sometimes because I've been in here on 16 and this boss has taken 4 minutes. You look down at the damage meter and you realize your Boomkin's been spamming Starfall on these ads that don't really do anything. In addition, I've seen Rep Paladin spam Divine Storm here and do negative boss dam, less than my Vengeance Demon Hunter and my Brewmaster, which is kind of crazy. These ads, like I said, don't mean much and they can be alive for a long time. One note is that on these Frundles from the boss cast, they're actually not that deadly. I'd recommend not disrespecting them. It's probably just in good faith to make sure that you press Diffuse, Celestial Brew, or make sure you're at least at full health when you're taking them. But for the Necrotic Eruption itself, it's not too deadly, and you'll see even through Diffuse there, my health didn't really move. With that in mind, make sure that even when you find boss mechanics on a key level down aren't killing you, there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't be hitting something here. Does that mean? Well, if my healer has to spend one extra resource, or one extra global worrying on me instead of doing damage, you're already slowing down the key. If I'm spending time healing myself instead of just free negating it through diffuse magic, if I have to press a global on Expel Harm instead of Tiger's Palm or Rising Sun Kick, I'm already slowing down the key. So make sure that you actually just press buttons. There's no reason to ego these abilities, and I think that's a huge tank learning lesson. And so you have defensive abilities that are actively costing you your damage, maybe like Metamorphosis, then you should just be pressing things and respecting mobs, as if you're saving globals, you're also doing more damage. I do hit my trinket on that one, and I'm back to just hitting the boss. At this point, we're going to be leaving here with about 5 minutes left, which gives us about 4 minutes for last boss. You're going to see here that I zoom off the platform pretty quick, I call my team to commit boss, I hit Tiger's Palm, and I'm just spamming roll in midair to make sure I have movement speed. I'm able to get to the RP pretty quickly, and this does kind of save us a ton of time in this key. One trick you can do is if you are playing Gorechop last, you can get somebody to die on the boss and start the RP, which might actually save you 15 seconds even with the death. As we do have 30 seconds here, and we're going to have about 4 minutes and change to fight the boss, I call that we want to kill this caster. Remember, the closest thing we have to a ranged kick is our Enhancement Shaman, and I don't want him getting off the boss to kick this during the boss encounter. Even if he sets a focus macro, I just want this thing dead, as I don't really want to worry about it, as there's going to be a ton of damage on me in the opener, and I want our DPS to be able to focus on mechanics. We have 10 seconds till the RP starts, but I do opt here to spend a couple extra seconds just finishing off this caster before we take the other two ads in the boss. I would not disrespect these contenders either, as when you're going to be fighting them with the boss, you're going to be taking a ton of damage. Brew, again, has a pretty easy time on this boss, just with dealing with the Reaper's Blade because of our stagger mechanic, but I would still recommend doing the exact same thing I talked about at the end of the Coal to Rock. You should be respecting this boss and pressing things as needed. You'll see that almost on every Reaver or Reaper's Glaive, or Reaping Scythe, sorry, that I'm going to be pressing something, whether it's Celestial Brew, Dampen Harm, Fort Brew, or calling for an external. I think I make one mistake in this fight and take one natty, but you know, I think I do end up living it. In the future, I probably wouldn't have done that. I do hit Dampen Harm here and Celestial Brew as these ads are still alive. If you are fighting the ads on this boss, make sure that when you're taking those scythes that you pop something in addition. If you do get global from a bad melee and your Celestial Brew gets eaten, it is a possibility that you could die on this boss, and I've seen some streams, albeit kind of funny, kind of sad, where your tank dies on this encounter. As you see, I egoed that last scythe even though I had buttons. I could have, called for PS, I could have Celestial Brewed, but I did take a huge hit there, and it did bring me down to about 10%. Meaning that if I had any other, instance of damage on this encounter, it could have actually just killed me right there. One thing to note is playing with this composition, playing with the priest, your priest can't kick in his own ad. Usually what you're probably used to is everybody kicks in their own ad, and here to make up for that, I'm always going to ROP in my priest's ad. Once it's ROPed in, I can call for stops, I can do things like leg sweep, or I can get my team to help kick it. But with that in mind, you want to make sure that these ads are grouped in, as with no silent sigil or no beam, they need to be close to melee for you to be able to use your utility. Using ring to get them grouped as opposed to spreading them out is probably way better, and I would recommend, doing that as opposed to spreading all the ads out for a good old ROP and a beam combo. The boss is at 50%, and we're going to be going into the second phase of this fight. Pay a little bit extra caution here about what I do here and how I use my buttons. I have Dampen coming up in 24 seconds, as you can see on the left hand side of my screen. I have Fort Brew, I have Diffuse, and I have my Trinket. I commit Fort Brew early as I have no overlapping damage here, and I want to use my bigger abilities such as my Dampen, my Trinket, and my Diffuse for when I have an overlapping combo of maybe ads alive in a circle as well as a Reaping Scythe. The deadliest combo on this fight is in the second phase, where you're going to be dealing with this ticking AoE, you're going to be dealing with an ad spawn and a Scythe overlap. That's where you should either get an external or use one of your biggest defensive abilities to make sure you cover the damage. Here is exactly what I'm talking about, and I commit my Trinket. I also committed Diffuse Magic there just to help out with the magic damage a little bit. I ROP in my Priest's ad, and I'm making sure I get some CC and control. Remember, a pseudo thing that you can do on this fight is use your paralysis as a pseudo kick. This will delay the death bolt on the ads and buy your team some time if one's about to go off. Especially if you're playing with a priest or a DPS player that doesn't have a kick like a Shadow Priest, they're not going to be able to kick in their ad every single time unless they play Silence. So again, help out your team where you can and make sure you save that leg sweep for everything's grouped. I did get a Fort Brew proc here, but it was kind of useless as I kind of wanted it on the next Scythe, but that's okay as I do have Dampen Harm coming up. We have a minute left in the key, the timer is ticking down, but I know we're going to be alright if we stay alive. At this point, we do have the circles. I hit Dampen Harm as I'm going to have a circle dampen or overlap here, and I'm saving that Celestial Brew in case I start dropping. I do ROP in, I do hit leg sweep, and I think we end up having a death here due to double bolts. The only stop we kind of had available left was Incapor and then Typhoon, but these ads didn't get grouped the way we wanted to, and our warrior does go down. That is okay, as at this point I'm a little bit weak for this last scythe, but I do manage to stay alive here for the very ending and touch of death of the boss. As you can see, this is how we timed our plus 17 theater on my Brewmaster Monk, and I think that this route absolutely bangs. I think if you can execute it and do it right, you can save a ton of time. And like I said, this was our first attempt at this. This was in practice, which means that I hope that when we go in the future and have a better outlook on this dungeon, we're going to be able to do more damage and speed this key up a ton. I really enjoyed this composition, and I really enjoyed the spec. I think Brew is awesome in this dungeon, and I think playing like a melee comp like this one is tons of fun. You kind of get every raid buff covered, and you do a ton of damage. With that in mind, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for watching. Thanks for all the support in the past couple months of all my videos, and as well for this channel. If there's anything that you think I missed, or anything you'd like to see, or anything that you think would be interesting for me to cover on Brew, feel free to drop something in the comments. Remember, again, I'm still pretty new to the spec again, as I didn't play last season, and this was my favorite in Dragonflight, so I'm learning a ton, and thank you for all the helpful comments. as I kind of like level up my character to the next level. I'd like to finish all 17s this coming week and get resilient. So if you have anything that you think is going to be helpful for me, let me know. Again, thanks for everything, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.